So we were just talking to Andrew Slack, and he's working on this.
No, I love Andrew. Okay. His work is great.
Yeah, he was doing an analogy between the struggle between the people and the elite, and Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars. I said them in the wrong order, but because you're so good at connecting the voting rights issue with the money and politics issue, can you talk about some of the times when there's been progress or there's been changes to the electorate and then there's been an Empire Strikes Back sort of backlash, and then kind of put us in the historical context of where we are today?
Well, look, there's always this back and forth. You know, the 15th Amendment, which when it was passed in 1870, nobody thought that was going to happen. Should have established a world where African American males, at least, had an equal right to vote. But very quickly, they found 1,000 techniques to make it impossible for African Americans to vote. And it was 100 years, 95 years, let's not exaggerate, before we finally, our grandparents and parents, passed the Voting Rights Act that made it possible for them to vote.
That's what 5,000 murders will do for you, buy you 95 years.
Yeah. I mean, 5,000 murders buys you lots of acquiescence because people are sane. And so it's a similar thing that's going on here. You know, every time we have a change, then they find a way around the change. So the McCain-Feingold was a change. They found a way around the change. And I think we have to learn from that and finally do a kind of reform that will really achieve change. So I think we've been doing reform on the cheap. We've not embraced the fundamental fact that we've got to change the way campaigns are funded. That means we've got to spend money on campaigns, public money on campaigns, because whoever funds campaigns gets to call the tune. You know, pay the piper, you call the tune. And we've got to be funding it ourselves so that we get to call the tune.
One of my favorite examples that you give in your speech is about the way that our children get fatter.
You know, we have this insane food policy in America. It subsidizes the production of poisonous food, taxes, tariffs the production of healthy food. And so what that does is produce an ecology of food which poisons our children, and poisons our children. They get incredibly sick through diabetes type 2, which is a disease that used to only happen to adults. Now it happens to kids. And we can't get out of it so long as we live in a system where the most important thing for politicians is to bend over backwards for farmers who believe, for some stupid reason, that these kind of subsidies actually benefit them. So this is a product, stupidly, of the way we fund campaigns. How outrageous is it that we imagine the health of our children suffering because we can't solve this one very small problem?
So who's the big money interest that sort of warps the process of elected representation in terms of that issue?
In terms of?
In terms of the issue of the farm subsidies.
Well, agribusiness, which grows corn, which then gets used to do biofuels and to produce high fructose corn syrup, gets subsidized dramatically by the government, so that these companies like ADM make billions of dollars from the subsidies the federal government gives them to grow this food. And then we at the same time tax sugar through import tariffs. And so what that means is that the sweetener people use shifts to high fructose corn syrup, something which in 1980 no human had ever consumed. Now something like 90% of the products in a supermarket have high fructose corn syrup in it. And this unintended distortion just follows from the stupid way in which we're funding campaigns, because these people are incredibly aggressive in supporting and forcing politicians to line up behind them.
So they rig the laws and the tax system so that more money flows into their pockets, and then they use that money to buy more influence, and it's just a big cycle.
Exactly right. So people say, when I say we need to have publicly funded elections, they said, how the hell are we going to afford that?
Yeah.
Well, look, we're paying for it. Right now, the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank, says that the amount of corporate welfare in our budget every year, the money given by our government to these corporations, is $100 billion with a B. Public funding of elections would cost maybe $3.5 billion a year. So if we could reduce corporate welfare by 10%, we could pay for public funding of elections 2.5 times over. Right? So what we're going to recognize is, however we decide to pay for elections, elections, that's going to radically affect the government we get. And if they depend on the tiny fraction of the 1% to fund their campaigns, they're going to reward them. And that's what they do. And the only way we fix that is to change the way we're going to fund elections.
And so one of the 4 pieces of legislation that Democracy Spring is focusing on is something that you've championed since I've known you, 5, 6, 7 years, the Fair Elections Now Act.
That's the Senate version. The House version is the Government by the People Act by John Sarbanes, who's been an incredible champion of this change. And what that does is basically make it possible for candidates to run campaigns where they take small contributions from thousands rather than large contributions from a few. So that when you're funding your campaign, you're worried about what, tens of thousands of people in your district are worrying about, not what the tiniest fraction of the 1% are worrying about. And congressmen are only human. They respond to incentives. And if you're funding from all of us, they'll respond to the incentive of making all of us happy. But if you fund from the tiniest fraction of the 1%, then they are the people who call the shots.
And it's also about the economy of the time they have in the day, right?
Gosh. They spend 30 to 70% of their time raising money. Same thing at the president level. We forget that every president between Nixon and Obama was elected with public funding. Ronald Reagan benefited from public funding more than anybody. He ran 3 national campaigns on the public's dime. But the most important difference that system produced is that fundraising. So Ronald Reagan, in his second term, attended 8 fundraisers. Barack Obama, when he ran for election, attended 220 fundraisers. You think, how do you, the president, leader of the free world, attending 220 fundraisers? And the point is, those fundraisers are not like random collections of Americans. They are the richest people who have to write checks of $35,000 or $50,000 to get in the door. Well, okay, it's not surprising that their understanding of America is distorted because of that.
And you're famous for saying that our system was already corrupt the day before the Citizens United decision. So my next question is, what was it that changed between Nixon and Obama that made that what you just described happen?
Well, Obama gave up public funding because the system hadn't been kept up to date. So he feared there was no way he could win. And I was really upset when he decided to do that, but that was his decision. And then Citizens United came 1 year after he was elected, right? But the thing that people forget is that, the January 20th, 2010, the day before Citizens United was decided, it's not like we had a healthy democracy, right? The democracy was already dead. The Supreme Court shot the body, but the body was already cold, right? So we have to recognize it's not enough to fight to overturn Citizens United. We've got to fight to change the way campaigns are funded. That's the fundamental change we have to find a way to get.
And let's just drill down in a little bit. So under your proposal, every citizen is entitled through government subsidy or government fund to $50?
Yeah, but let's say that in a Tea Party-like way.
Okay.
Every citizen gets the first $50 of his or her tax dollars returned to him or her, right? The Tea Party guy would say, look, it was my money. How don't you just give him my money back? Because all of us send at least $50 to the federal government. So we get the first $50 back. In my proposal, then you use that to give to candidates who say, I agree to fund campaigns with small contributions of up to $100 plus these vouchers. And that would radically change the way candidates raise money. Now, the Government by the People Act is very close to that. They give a $100 voucher, tax credit, and they match small contributions up to 9-to-1 if you agree only to fund with small contributions. So that system also would produce a system where people are raising money from tens of thousands rather than the tiny few. Any of those changes would radically change the economy of influence in Washington, which is why the lobbyists in Washington are terrified that this change would actually come about. Because if it did, they wouldn't have anything like the power they have right now.
Can I give you one more? Okay. Tomorrow is Environmental Justice Day. Can you connect the money in politics and voting rights issues to environmental justice?
Well, look, Jim Hansen, maybe one of the most important climate change scientists, NASA scientists, in his latest book said, look, the thing that stops climate change legislation from happening is money in politics. He's become a money in politics advocate first. And the reason for that is, this is not a partisan point. When the Democrats had a supermajority in Congress, supermajority in the Senate, majority in the House, a Democratic president, they didn't pass climate change legislation. Because what they knew is if they did, coal companies and oil companies would destroy the Democratic base. So until we make it so that they don't have the power they have in the system, until we make it so we have actually a representative democracy, there is no hope of climate change legislation. And when politicians stand and say they're going to get something like that done, you guys got to laugh at them and say, either you think I'm an idiot or you're an idiot, because it just can't happen under this system. So climate change, the issues that the youth care about, the issues old people care about, health care, it doesn't matter what your issue is. It's trivial to show how it all ties back to this fundamental issue.
Thank you so much. Lawrence Lessig. Follow him at Lessig, at Lessig. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Are underrepresented and show that